get to listen to the dulcet tones of Mr. Jason Sigalos, Emory debater extraordinaire and now coach at Emory University, one of the finest young minds in college debate. I urge you to pay very close attention. Okay.
Hi. So the first lecture today is going to be on the history of the difference between state and federal education policy. So before we get into the dates, the people, the scandals even, I really do want to have a kind of debriefing about why this stuff is important, because I think that the tendency of a lot of y'all when you hear history is going to be like, oh God, this is so useless. When can we start talking about like the DA overview or the critique argument? I can't wait for Sean to get here to tell me about competitiveness. I get it. You know, this is not the cool lecture, but this is an important lecture that serves as the backdrop for most of the other content that we're going to be talking about throughout the rest of camp. So the history of state/federal education policy and the conflicts between the two of those is important because it is the most easily identifiable fulcrum point in the resolution around which debates will shape. It is the most easily identifiable fulcrum point around which debates will shape. What do I mean by that? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the affirmatives will be about how state education policy is insufficient in the status quo and about how federal education policy needs to get better. So that's how it's going to shape a lot of affirmatives. How exactly does it inform negative strategy? Yeah, the 50 states counterclaim. Bingo. Just right off the bat, that is going to be one of the defining issues of the topic. And, you know, if one of y'all told me like 9 months from now, hey Jason, 50% of my debates were about the state's counterclaim, I'd be like, makes sense. I'm shocked it's not higher. So you really have to kind of understand the history and background behind these things. You know, this lecture won't help you debate theory, but it will help you do research. It will help you identify the key words, the key advantages, the key disadvantages against the state's counterclaim, all of which is going to be necessary for you to craft successful affirmatives throughout the year, as well as successful negative strategies. But it's important beyond the arguments. It's super important for how we debate the arguments. So the history provides context for affirmatives. What do I mean by that? Provides context for affirmatives. Yeah?
Just to know what the changes in the education policy have to know what's already there, so that foundation is
Absolutely. In order to know what needs to be changed, you need to know what's already there and why it's bad or problematic. How does that help the negative? It can help you identify status quo solved arguments. But if I know what's going on right now, what can I do as the negative? I'm crafty too late. Yeah.
Cut counterclaims or counterclaims that solve it in a more efficient way.
Sure, but how are you going to know what counterplans to cut? It all gets back to history, bingo. The answer is history. You know the history behind these things, and that'll tell you, hey, what might an affirmative look like? What does the history of federal education policy look like? How is that going to craft a mechanism that an affirmative is likely to use? Does that open up an obvious counterplan that I can write that is very competitive or that solves the large majority of a certain affirmative? Because there are two reliable mechanisms in the resolution. What are they? There are two of them. Yeah? Yeah, regulation and spending. Regulation and funding. So, if we look at the history of the way those two things have evolved at the federal level in reaction to the state level throughout time, that both provides a context, if I'm a 2A, to identify what an affirmative looks like, what makes sense as an affirmative mechanism. But as the negative, it also helps me predict what those affirmatives will be, so I have more time to write and research counterplan strategies. Knowing the history also helps you with the debating. You can use historical examples to identify when federal government government spending or regulation has been good or has been bad. It's particularly useful for uniqueness, link, and some critique arguments. So I implore you, even beyond the research level, even beyond the what act should I read, what counterpoint should I read, even beyond that level, in the actual debating, when you're giving a speech, knowing the history is really important to make you not sound like a dummy. Because you're going to have to be able to talk about when federal policy has worked and not worked. Most of these affirmatives are written, and solvency evidence is written through a history process. If you look at a ton of the think tank articles, research reports, law reviews about education policy, I would say a solid 50 to 60% of them have a section at the top that's the history of federal action in this area that I'm going to talk about, be it special needs education, be it STEM education, be it a different kind of curriculum or teachers unions that are all going to talk about the history at the very top. So if you have a firm foundation for that, it'll help. Now, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to write on the board very little, but the kind of main themes in the lectures I'm going to call the key inflection points throughout history, and there are 4, maybe 5 of them. So there's going to be a ton of dates. You should kind of write down the stuff you can write down, or type it out for those of you using laptops. For those of you not using laptops, good job. But write it out. The dates are not going to be super duper important. I think it's more important to think of these things sequentially as telling a story. What are the important eras? What are the important inflection points? So, as a preface, we go back to 1785 and 1787 with the Land Ordinance and Northwest Ordinance. Even before the Constitution was established, these ordinances said that there was the responsibility of the nation to provide an education system. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution granted Congress the power to tax and spend, so they decided to do that and said that the federal government had the power to tax money and spend that money to incentivize educational activity. However, the requirement of these systems for public education said that each township, as they were called way back in the olden times, each township had the responsibility for crafting their own educational system. These regulated monies or taxes were raised, given to local areas, and then they spent that on educational policy. But even before the Constitution was written, was passed, there was this thought, this idea that the federal government has the power of the purse, local areas know how to educate. Which brings us kind of to our first big thing of note. The 10th Amendment. Anybody know what that is? It's super obscure. There's 9 before it. Anybody want to take a stab what that is? I have the text in front of me, so if you're wrong, I'll correct you. Yeah.
All power not delegated to the federal government falls upon the state.
Yeah, that was pretty close, yeah. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. So, the Constitution doesn't say the federal government has this power, it doesn't say the states do not have the power. If it's vague about those things, either of those, whether or not the federal government has it or the states do not have it, then it's assumed that that power goes to the states. Public education was not mentioned as a federal power, and so historically has been delegated to local and state governments. So we saw it with the ordinances earlier that talked about territories. Now we're seeing it in the very Constitution, the Bill of Rights. So the 10th Amendment provides a very interesting, just constitutional backbone for the legal history behind state versus federal education policy. Now we can see this statutorily. So we have constitutional, legal theory, and then we have statutory legal theory. Statutory refers to the policies of Congress and whatnot. The constitutional cases are decided by the Supreme Court. So those are kind of 2 different areas, but they inform one another. So this brings us to 1841 and 1848, land grants. Another very interesting thing. Congress passed an act that granted 500,000 acres to 8 states and later increased land grants to a total of 19 states. The federal government also granted money to states. Why did they do that?
to incentivize the states to build institutions of land.
Bingo. Yep. Here's this land, here's this money. Build colleges, schools, universities, and teach the people in your states. The federal government did not tell them what to teach. Just, here's money for public education. Now, we can start to see how this changes a little bit. 1862, the first Morrill Act, aka the Land Grant Act, so a lot of land grants. It donated public lands to states to be used for the endowment to support and maintain at least one college with the specific purpose of teaching branches of agriculture, mechanic arts, and industrial education. Here, we see a deviation. About a generation after the Constitution, we see a little bit of a deviation to focus on a specific kind of education. So, another important aspect of this date is that 1862, what else is going on? Civil War. So, the federal government, in its powers, was trying to, control its own destiny a little bit more, as we could say, to make sure that they would have enough farmers, they would have enough teachers during these dire times. So that's some of the context around out of which this act was passed. So you start to see the federal government taking a little bit more active role in what does the nation need. So 1867, we get the original Department Office of Education. We now know this as the Department of Education, but that first came about in some form in 1867. It began to collect data, information on schools and teaching that would help states establish effective school systems. So this federal agency looked at all the states, gathered data about them, processed it, and then gave that data back to states to say, here's how you can use this to improve your own systems. This brings us to another very big inflection point. The 14th Amendment. What does that do? Yep.
All people that were born in the United States are given citizenship.
Okay.
Equal protection laws.
Equal protection clause. What does that say?
It was either all citizens or all people, all citizens have equal rights, either under or
Yeah.
under the jurisdiction.
You're definitely in there. So that's part one. This is part two. This is the one that we're going to focus on. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. Why is that relevant for this topic? Obviously, it's big relevances. Yep.
The right to education can't be abridged in that case.
Interesting. So the first part of that phrase, right to education, does that exist at the federal level? No. There's nowhere in the Constitution that says you have the right to an education. In state constitutions, however, states do say you have a right to an education. However, what this clause does, what this amendment does, is it applies all of that equally. It says that all of the states are not allowed to provide those rights unequally. Everybody, regardless of race, religion, nationality, etc., all of that has to be provided equally. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out that way. So, that brings us to 1890 with the second Morrill Act. It gave the Office of Education, so what's currently now the Department of Education, responsibility for administering support for the original system of land grant colleges. So this just gives a little bit more power to the original Department of Education to have a greater control over those land grant colleges. So we go back to those land grant acts where states received land and money to set up colleges. Now the federal government has more control over those colleges and schools. You'll see why that's kind of an interesting difference from what we have now a little bit later. And now we fast forward way ahead. This one's kind of irrelevant, but it's something that you all should know. 1944, we have the GI Bill. It provided post-secondary education assistance to GIs returning from World War II. The topic doesn't deal with post-secondary education, but GI Bill, know about it. So, we have our third big inflection point coming up. And this doesn't have a specific date, it has kind of a range of dates that I like to think about. We have this very large chunk of time, and honestly I could expand these dates a little bit more, but for the purposes of our conversation, I think this is a pretty compartmentalized set of dates that you can focus on and know about. We have the era of civil rights regulation. So, we can begin this story in 1950 in two Supreme Court cases, Sweat v. Painter and McLaurin v. Oklahoma State Regents. Who's heard of those? Nice. Tell me about them.
I know this, like, the Oklahoma State Regents one.
Yeah.
It's about the plaintiff sued the Oklahoma State Board because he was not offered, he didn't get a spot in their law school or one of their schools because he was an African American, and the court ruled against, or the court ruled in favor of the plaintiff.
Yes. So, those two cases, as this young man just outlined, had the Supreme Court align with an African American man to say that the state of Oklahoma and all other states could not deny post-secondary education on the basis of race. So this day kind of officially marked the end of the separate but equal doctrine of Plessy v. Ferguson in graduate and professional education. That gets expanded a little bit later, but for graduate and professional education. 1954, we get Brown versus Board of Education. Who's heard of this one? Yep, those people, I would hope. Okay, so what does Brown v. Board decide? Yep, can you speak up?
If you just go to the rest of the school with K-12 education, you can't discriminate based on race, religion, etc.
Yep, yep. Anybody want to add to that? Yeah?
Well, so that separate is inherently unequal, not just that like in practice it's unequal, it's definitely separation.
Yes. So here we see a kind of total overthrow of the separate but equal doctrine. That separate is inherently unequal, and therefore you cannot bar access to a school for any child on the basis of race. With these two cases, what I want us to think about is what is the federal government regulating? So the Supreme Court has barred, Supreme Court, part of the federal government, has barred the states from separating out people on the basis of race. What is the federal government regulating in this instance?
Education.
Sure. More specifically, what about education? Yeah?
Admission.
What?
Admission.
Admission? What's a maybe broader word for that? Hmm? Access. Access. The federal government is regulating access to education. Did the Supreme Court say, okay, now that black students are allowed to go to the same school as white students, did it say, oh, now you have to teach people differently? No. It's about access. So, in this era of civil rights regulation, we can kind of see, and it has bases in the 14th Amendment, we see a kind of regulation emerge about access to education. So, as a debater, came to the debate camp, what is that going to tell me about some affirmatives that might exist over the course of the year?
go regularly about like things like the ability case where there's like regulation of who has access to what.
Sure. We'll get to that in a second. It doesn't necessarily have to be specific, but more broadly, what is a genre of affirmatives going to be about? Yeah. Yeah, increasing access to education. You can come up a little bit closer because we don't hear very well back there. About increasing access to education. Because despite some of these gains, despite the 14th Amendment, despite some of these court cases, is access equal now? No, it is not. That's some of the context that you're going to have to know about the topic. Access to education is by no means equal in the United States. So, there's going to be a whole genre of affirmatives that have its anchor in these two kind of inflection points. And it's important to know about that, both as a 2A and a 2M. Now, this is a kind of subheader of that. 1965. This marked the time of LBJ's, Lyndon Baines Johnson's, President after Kennedy's, Great Society. Great Society. In this year, he passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Elementary and Secondary Education Act. ESEA. The ESEA. Write that down. That is huge. I would say that this is probably the most important piece of legislation that is going to be referenced time and time again throughout every piece of literature. So you'll see that later on when we get talking about some of the more recent innovations, most of them are just building on, amending, reauthorizing this ESEA. So it's really important to know what this foundation is. So this happened on April 11th, 1965. The legislation constituted a very large expansion in the role of the federal government in the classroom, which, as we've discussed, was an area that had previously been left to state and local governments. Title I of this act earmarked federal funding for poor children, and this provision is still in effect today. Title I stipulated the distribution of funds to state education departments, which then allocated the money to school districts with the highest concentration of low-income children. So it said, here's a bunch of money, but you have to use that money on your lowest income children and students. Make sense? So we see funding, but we also see a little bit of regulation. You get the money, but you have to do these things. Make sense? Unfortunately, this policy introduced new problems. For one, the legislation did not provide oversight of how the money was used. So specifically, it didn't follow the money. It said you had to do this, but that didn't necessarily mean that there was administrative accountability for that. And the guidelines governing how funds would be allocated and applied were poorly written. So schools would take the money and then use them for whatever they want. Or they would say the money was going to low-income children, but how do you determine that? States had different standards for what qualified or counted as their low-income school districts. So it was very difficult for the federal government to know whether or not the money was actually being used as intended. So, and a lot of times, the money was just taken and it was used to cover funding gaps in state budgets. So, it's kind of a grand idea, part of the Great Society, but it didn't work out entirely, super well. All right, so this brings us to 1971, going back to the courts. Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education. The court held that busing was an appropriate remedy for the problem of racial imbalance in schools, even when the imbalance resulted from the selection of students based on geographic proximity to the school, rather than from deliberate assignment based on race. What does that mean? Yeah?
If students in one geographical area or one metropolitan city wanted to go to school in the suburban area, they could, and were in the state had to bus them there.
Yes. You're speaking about this in slightly more of a positive right, a positive term. The state had to do this. That force was associated with a different kind of thing. So to repeat what this court decided was that if there was racial segregation caused by geography alone, so it's not racial segregation because I am saying only white people or only black people could go to certain schools. It was racial segregation based upon geography. Oh, only white people live here and only black people live there, which was a product of a bunch of other historical but other related factors. Even though geography determines school assignment, if the schools are still racially imbalanced, busing was mandated as the remedy to force integration. So we go back to some of the language of separate is inherently unequal, and we say because separate is inherently unequal, no matter why they are separate, if they're separate, we have to force integration. So that identified busing as the main policy for that. Make sense? So again, we see access. Statutorily, the ESEA focused on access for poor children. This one, another part of access for minorities. 1972, we get Title IX, which prohibited discrimination in education based on gender. Sounds pretty straightforward. 1973. I've already heard several of the lab leaders talking about this, so I know that it is an affirmative that some of y'all will be researching. San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez. San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez. What did that say? Yep.
There's no federal right to education.
Yes. For the most part. That's a part. That's a big takeaway. Anybody know about any of the details of the case? I found this one kind of interesting. I forgot about this one.
Isn't it that states are the only ones that can regulate school funding?
That's a part of it. So, in addition to being funded through a state-funded program designed to establish a minimum educational threshold in every school, Texas public elementary and secondary schools relied on local property taxes for supplemental revenue. So every state had a base amount of revenue, and then each local school district relied on local property taxes to add to the school's revenue, to add to the school's funding. The San Antonio Independent School District, acting on behalf of students whose families reside in poor districts, challenged this funding scheme by arguing that it underprivileged such students because their schools lacked the vast property tax base that other districts utilized. To break that down, some schools are in rich areas and some schools are in poor areas. Poor areas have a lower amount of property tax paid, and sometimes not at all. Rich areas, the people around them, pay more property taxes. So you see, they all have that base amount of funding provided by the state, the federal government, but because of property taxes, the poor areas have a little bit more money, and then the rich areas have a ton more money. So the question in this case was whether or not Texas's public education finance system violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause by failing to distribute funding equally among school districts. So this kind of gets to the first takeaway that we talked about. The Supreme Court decided no, it did not violate the Equal Protection Clause. The court refused to examine the system with strict scrutiny, kind of a legal term that will come up if you research legal affirmatives a lot. Failed to examine the system with strict scrutiny since there is no fundamental right to education in the Constitution, and since the system did not systematically discriminate against all poor people in Texas. So, if I was a poor student who happened to go to a school in a rich area, technically I wasn't being discriminated against. So the Supreme Court said that there was no violation of the Equal Protection Clause. Why is this a very important landmark case? One of those words, so this is regulation of what again? Access. Why is this case super important for that?
It wasn't necessarily more about access, it was more about funding instead.
Yes, but I would phrase that in a different way. It was about access, but it was about whether or not funding was necessary for access. Why is that important for this resolution? An affirmative could fix that, but what's one of the two mechanisms that an affirmative could use? Funding. So this historically defines what access is. Access is not determined by funding. It's determined by, are there any legal obstacles? If no, then it's fine. There's no mandated right to education in the Constitution. This brings us to 1974, a banner year. Milliken v. Bradley. Someone's already mentioned this one. Yep. What is it?
It's a court case that said, like, instead of schools being racially segregated, they're geographically segregated. Like, people, like, good school districts can be predominantly white areas because, like, of what you said about like, income tax, or like, necessarily, like, not as well performing schools don't have that much income tax, and they are most minority areas.
Close. I think you're kind of blending in two details from two different cases. The big takeaway from this one is that there was a lawsuit saying that the Detroit public school system was racially segregated as a result of official policies, so they sued Governor Milliken. After reviewing the case and concluding that the system was in fact segregated, a district court, so a lower court, ordered the adoption of a desegregation plan that encompassed 85 outlying school districts. So a district court, a lower court, ordered the government to desegregate 85 school districts. And how did they define desegregation? Going back to Brown v. Board, we had it over here, right here. What did you say about Brown v. Board?
Oh, it's inherently unequal.
Yes, so they define desegregation as we have to get rid of all separation because separation is inherently unequal. So the lower court said that you have to desegregate this. However, in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court held that, quote, with no showing of significant violation by the 53 outlying school districts and no evidence of any inter-district violation or effect, the district court's remedy was wholly impermissible and not justified by Brown. The court noted that desegregation, in the sense of dismantling a dual school system, so separate school systems, did not require any particular racial balance in each school, grade, or classroom. The court said this because it said that local control